Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Last time you were here, we were working on a couple of picture frames. I mentioned to you about measuring them out, cutting to a certain size, orienting them the way you wanted it. Did you want to see the edge? Do you want to see the surface? Do you want it matted? Did you not want it matted? Again, before you start your whole project, you want to answer these questions. What's going on in there? What do you have that's going in there? What is going in that opening? So again, think of yourself, is it just going to be a simple mirror? Is it going to be a picture? Is it just going to be a picture? Is it going to be a picture? Is it going to be mat board? Is it going to be a picture, mat board, glass? Is it going to be picture, mat board, glass, plastic? What's going to go in there? Is it two-sided? Is it one-sided? Because we want to look at two-sided things a little bit as well when we're cutting out miters and frames. The other thing, and I mentioned to you, is it going on its edge or is it going on its surface? What part of the board do you want to see more? You want to see more wood on surface? Would you rather see less wood just on the edge and more of a shadow box kind of look, more of an accent kind of thing? And if it's a picture, do you want it matted? And I would always suggest if you make something and it's worth framing, it's worth matting. If you mat something, it kind of gives it that little extra distinguished thing telling you that it's important. And cutting a piece of mat board is a relatively easy thing to do. After we make the frame, what we'll do is we'll bring the poster or those pictures that I'm going to frame in. We'll cut the mat board and I'll show you why we make the frame first when you're working with matted stuff, because I can actually cut the mat board because it's simply paper. I can cut it to the exact opening that is. If you're working with a hard material like a mirror, a piece of glass, the frame has to be exactly that size. What you want to do is take the piece of glass first. I can't tell you how many times, if you're off by 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, it might make a difference depending on the size of the rabbet. So there's a lot of thinking to do with this, not, I want to make a frame. The other thing is, if you guys have, I said to you, graduation pictures before, but how about sports pictures? I mean, they're huge now. You got a picture, I think I saved one picture of me playing basketball when I was in high school. One picture of me taking up one foul shot. That was the only picture that's ever taken of me. I look at you guys, you have 1 million pictures because of the cell phones and things like that. So if you have great action shots of you, it is so cool to make a picture that is not just one single picture, but make a montage, make a collage, make a whole bunch of things. And you could do that. And again, with everything, especially with woodworking, it's left just up to your imagination. What would look good and what would look tacky? Let's go over to that glue table, hopefully try to glue this thing up. One frame, if I get lucky, maybe 2 frames. Let's take a walk back over to this table. And I'll give you some things that had happened in the past, maybe serve as a little reminder to you. I don't know if you remember, but when I was cutting my 8 pieces, of course, I didn't plan ahead enough, and I found out that this one board had a bit of a curve to it. There's a curve to that thing. What I'm gonna try to do is straighten this out when I clamp it up, make it do some things it doesn't wanna do. When I do this, I said to you, I probably should have had this as the short piece, because if there's a curve to it and I cut it shorter, it'll take some of that curve out. So this probably should have been the shorter length piece, but again, you live and learn. You think about that stuff afterwards. What I did before you guys got here was I set up one of these Merle picture frame clamps. There's a bunch of these in the shop, and I noticed that they work pretty well. I'm happy with them. The thing that's a little bit tricky with them is they're a little flimsy to work with. So if you're working by yourself, it becomes a little bit of an issue. What you want to do is you're going to have this banding held in place by this spring-loaded little reservoir. What you're going to do is you're going to pull this area out. Be careful not to come in contact with that little handle that spins it back up. What I want to do is I want to open up the banding on this large enough So this isn't hanging off of the table and pulling the whole clamp down. I want it so it's definitely making contact with the floor, and that way it doesn't force everything down. If this thing was short, it would cause this, because this is very, very heavy, it'll cause the whole frame to come over. So I'm gonna open this up so it accepts the size of my frame and throw the rest of it on the floor where it's not gonna affect anything. The other thing that I did before you guys got here was I took a look at the pieces that I had and I tried to match the color as best as I could. I wanted to attack this piece first, which is that bent piece. I always like to do the harder stuff first rather than the easier stuff. So what I did was I laid this in place and tried to match the color of all of these pieces. If you remember, I had a piece that had the spring wood. Remember, this was the longer piece that I cut shorter. This spring wood kind of works with this side. It's a little bit on the lighter side. And then I noticed that I have a little hint of spring wood on this bottom side. So I'm going to try to match them up this way. The other thing that's really, really important before you start to put glue on anything is that you take this, open up the clamp, and put this actually together dry. I don't put any glue on this. The reason why I mentioned this to you is I had a student who was making a box, a very standard little 6x9 glove box. What happened was he was cutting the miters out on that miter saw. I mentioned to you several times that when you're adjusting the miter to a 45-degree angle, there's a positive lock that snaps in exactly at 45 degrees. You should hear it click in place. If you don't and you move it all the way to the extreme left and the extreme right, it'll eventually stop. But you're cutting a miter that's probably about 51 degrees. This student had 4 sides to a box, and through no fault of his, it's just he didn't know because he wasn't familiar with it. He moved the miter all the way over to the 51-degree angle. He made his cuts. We took out 2 Merle clamps. We're ready to glue the whole thing together. And instead of the corners being 90 degrees, they were 51 degrees. So the whole project looked like this. It was splayed out. And it was one of those things you're like, what happened? Well, he made that cut as a mistake on probably about 4 miters, 1 on each side. So when you look at that, always try to dry clamp the project together without any glue. Just make sure that it lines up before you put any glue on anything. I tell you that when you're working on the glue table, if you're gluing boards edge to edge, you want to lay your clamps out so that they're good to go. Everything should line up. You should have those little wedges just in case those clutches slip, but everything should be laid out. You shouldn't be fumbling after you put glue on your project. Now I got to get the clamp. Now I got to get this. It's going to be a total disaster. I understand that there's 16, 17 kids in each class, but if you plan ahead, clear off an area like I did over here, it's just me. And I know it's difficult, but if you just plan ahead, life becomes a whole lot easier. Before I put glue on this as my final gluing, there's something that you should know about these boards. If you look at the way it was cut, this is the part of the tree that goes up, which means this is an end, this is an end. And the same thing is true on all the pieces that have been mitered. They're all ends. Glue is a liquid. So if I take this glue and I put it on this end, I put it on this end, I'm going to put it on these ends, those ends before I clamp the whole project together. With this end grain being porous, it is where water is accepted. What is glue? It is water as its base. So if I put glue on here, believe it or not, some of it will be not absorbed, as my neighbor would say, absorbed by the ends. So if you put glue on each one of these ends, by the time I finish with all 4 of these pieces, a lot of that glue will be absorbed by that end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen. I'm going to take the glue and I'm going to put 1 little drop of glue right on that very end. And you're looking at me going, what do you mean 1 little drop? I put enough for this end, and what I'm going to do is actually rub it in. So you don't see any glue on that at all. With what I have left, I'm going to flip it around to the other side. I'm going to put glue on here. If there's too much glue where it feels like there's a layer, I'm going to wipe off any excess. What I want to do is just put enough of glue on there so that it is absorbed by the end grain and it dries. That way, when I put glue on a second time, it will stay exactly where I want it to be. It's not going to be absorbed because that end grain is sealed up by the glue that I put on the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to seal the end grain on each one of these pieces. What we'll do is we'll just go to the fast forward mode. Now I have sealed that was pretty good, wasn't it? Holy cow. That's my second best gag next to taking off my thumb. I'm all set, ready to put the glue on because I seal these end grains before you beamed in on this. So what we're going to do now is we'll put glue on for real and we'll see how this works. A couple of things, again, thinking ahead. This Merle clamp has an angled clamp that will tighten this down. The last thing that I want to do is have this angled stop, this little clamp, facing down, because if it faces down on the table, it's not going to lay flat on the surface of the table. So what I did was I laid out the clamp before. I put a little pressure on the clamp. I dry clamped my boards. I liked the way it looked. It was pretty good. I made sure that this little angled piece that tightens down the clamp was in the up position, and I'm all set ready to put real glue on each one of my ends. So when I do this, I'm not going to go fast. I'll go regular speed. I'm going to put a little bit more on. Not more on, a little more on. But what I'm going to do is to make sure that I don't put too much on. Because remember, this surface has been sanded. I want to put just enough on so that it's going to stay, but it's not going to cause this to slide all over the place. If I put extra like I did there, I move on to the next miter. The other thing you want to do is if you ever have to clean your fingers, let the miter be your finger cleaner. I'm going to take this, I just wipe off the excess on here, and that way I'm not gathering up a ton of glue on my fingers. Now this is the way it was placed. This is the way I'll put it back. Remember, the one that was on the right side, that one over there, the issue one, I sealed the end grain up last, so I'll put glue on that side last. Not a whole lot of glue, but enough. The worst thing is if you don't put on enough glue. The second worst thing is if you put on too much. It's like Goldilocks. If I put on too much, it's going to spew onto that surface that I took forever to sand. Actually, I sanded that when you guys were in break. And cameraman said, come on, let's go get it sanded. I was busting my tail here. All right, let's see if these line up. I did go to church and I did give up drinking. So I placed these together. Lo and behold, it fits in the clamp. And the other part that's interesting, this table is original to this high school, which means it's probably about 83 years old. There's a crest right over there, so I always try to avoid that. This area appears nice and flat. What I did was I lined these up so that the miter looks like it's pretty accurate. I'm going to try to do that on each one of these. And I often talk to my students about one side overriding the other. The thing that you have to be careful at is that if you have one miter on this, overlap the other side. Because not only is it off on this side, it's off on the inside and it looks terrible. So what I want to do, I'm going to line this up as accurately as I can. And what we usually do is we'll have 3 or 4 students on each one of these corners. That way I'm responsible for this one. Someone else is responsible for this one, this one, this one. so that all I have to worry about is my one corner. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury today because it's just me and cameraman. So what I'm gonna try to do is accurately, and on this one, I might need 2 pair of glasses on this one. I'm gonna try to accurately line this up and slowly tighten that clamp. Remember, this was the curved part, so this will probably be the worst frame. I'll probably have a lot more success with that second frame. So this one will be for my son, who never calls, never writes, never says anything positive about his parents who nurtured him, gave him a place to sleep and a place to eat. Not that I'm bitter or anything like that, you know what I'm saying? But this will be his because it'll be the worst of the 2 frames. Let's see, so I line up my miters. I'm gonna start with this, and I'm gonna slowly tighten. And that's the way these Merle clamps work. I tighten down that angled latch, and now what I'm gonna do is just slowly tighten the handle. Which way do I tighten it? Oh, clockwise, and you'll start to feel a little bit of resistance. So I feel resistance here, and this miter lines up pretty accurate. Let me take a look at this one. This one is a little bit off. So what I'm gonna do is just sort of line that up. So maybe that looks a little bit better. That one's pretty good. This one's way off. And remember, this was the curved side, so I might have an issue with this. I'm gonna line this up. This side's pretty much lined up. This side pretty much lined up. And this one's still lined up. So now I'm gonna tighten it a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. I just wanna double check to see if any of these miters moved. Still good, still pretty good. Let me tighten it a little bit more. That one moved a little bit now. And this again is the side that I thought I was gonna have an issue with. Yep, this side is pretty good. That one's pretty good. This one's not too bad. And let me tighten it a little bit more. I just wanna double check to make sure that's tight. Good, good. So I'm putting pressure on this. And the ones that I want you to look at, this one here, this one here, this one here, they all look pretty good. This one, you know, is a little bit raised up over here, but I think that's as good as I'm gonna get that. I tighten it up more. I can't get that any tighter, so I'm actually pretty satisfied with that. Now the question becomes, is this thing square? Because it could be a parallelogram and look like that. How do I check if this is square? Most people will tell me that if I come over to the old rack and I get out a tri-square and I butt this up against here, that will tell me if this is square. That's true, but the way you want to square up large objects is, believe it or not, by using a tape measure. And you look at that and you go, what are you talking about, a tape measure? Again, the principles of geometry, when we talked about taking boards and truing up edges so that you had a good glue joint, we said one was going to be the complement or the supplement of the other. We wanted one cutting on the opposite side. Think about what we did when we were cutting these miters on that miter saw. We made one cut with the miter facing up. And if you remember when we set up the stop to do the opposite side, it was the opposite way. So we cut them to be a complement, a 90-degree opposite of the other side. So we were kind of thinking about that, and I didn't even tell you that. Well, on this, to check to see if this is square, yes, I could use a tri-square, but on big areas, if you use a tri-square, what happens is a lot of times you're not as accurate. So here's the trick when I'm cutting and I'm checking to see big things, like if I'm putting together a deck, is it exactly 90 degrees? I'm gonna take this frame, I'm gonna flip it on the opposite side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a measurement. And the measurement that I take is going to go from corner, inside corner, to the other inside corner, the opposite inside corner. If this is exactly 90 degrees, I should get the same measurement from one corner to the other corner. In other words, going across, I should have the same measurement on this side. If I don't, it is literally a parallelogram. This area would measure out greater than this area. So I know that I have to rack it and move it back in a certain measurement. If I took this tri-square and I butt this up against there, this looks pretty accurate to me. But let's just say, I don't know for sure if it's going to be. Let's take a measurement. So I'm going to take the end of this tape measure. I'm going to put it right on that corner. And remember, when I do the opposite side, I have to do it the same exact way. So if I look at that measurement, I get a measurement of, it looks to me to be like 31 1/8. 31 1/8 is the measurement that I need it to be from this side to this corner. So if I take my tape measure, put it in the same exact spot on the opposite side, now I slide this one over, I should get a measurement of exactly 31 1/8, and because this is the movies, I guess it worked out. So that looks to me like it is 31 1/8. It looks to be exactly square. The question is, what happens if it isn't? What do you do? If this number was greater or less than the other one, what I would do is I would take a clamp, a bar clamp, and just squeeze it in this way. That's an easy way to correct it. Let's just take a quick measurement on the outside. I get 32 3/4. Let's just see how it is outside to outside here. If you take a look at this, I get exactly 32 3/4 over here. So there's no need to do anything to this. But like I said, if it was off, I take a bar clamp, put it here, and literally squeeze the thing together on the long side to even it out to the short side, okay? Right now, this is all set. It has to dry. Probably about 24 hours is what I'm comfortable with. If you had to work it quicker, I guess you can. But to me, they're miters, and they are the least strong joint that we have in the shop. When you think about this, what do I have here? It's literally two pieces of end grain glued together, and the only thing that's holding these two pieces of wood, or these 4 pieces of wood together, is the glue that I use. Yes, the glue is strong, but how can I reinforce this miter to make it stronger? And we come up to the old spline. A spline is a piece of wood. To me, it's a trademark of the shop. I learned this when I was at Trenton State College, the College of New Jersey now. When I was taught about how to make a miter, and they said to me, this is the weakest of all joint, how would you make it stronger? And I said, I don't know, put a screw through it? No, I don't think so. What I did was I made a jig, and the jig goes on the table saw. It allows this piece of wood to be cut, this corner to be cut with the dado head a certain amount off. And then what we'll do is we'll take a piece of wood, surface it down to the cut that's been made. And then we'll take that piece of wood, in this case it's a piece of walnut, I'll line it up with the groove and I'll place it into the cut that I just made, and I'll glue it in. So as a result, you will have a miter, but it's reinforced with wood that's going across the grain. So if I were to ever try to break this, it won't, because that grain prevents it. It's like a piece of plywood. That grain will prevent that miter from breaking. If I just glued this and hit it on the table, it would break like nobody's business. So our miter gets reinforced with a spline, and in many cases, as I showed you here, this spline is a decorative thing. If you don't want to see the spline, you could simply make the spline the same color as the wood. Most people look at it and say it's a touch of class. How'd that thing get in there? I look at walnut and my maple over here as being great contrast. That's why I like that. On that piece of, or that frame that's gonna be cherry, I don't know if I'm gonna have a lighter color because that will eventually darken up and the lighter wood stays darker. Or I really like what Naomi did here and put a piece of Purple Heart and a piece of walnut. That looks really cool. Or what I could do is what Irene did, and that is to get a piece of piece of ash to go with her piece of cherry. So as the cherry darkens, the ash will stay light. So there's a million different things that you can do, only limited by your good taste. When you guys come back, I'll have my second frame glued up. The other thing that I'll be able to do is I'll be able to clean that up. We'll cut the spline in it, and then what we'll do is we'll put it in place, machine it, round over the frame, and get that ready for finishing. So my question to you this time, what's that little thing that goes in the corner of a miter to reinforce it? It's a spline. And think of the color spline you want for the frame that you make. Any questions? You know where I am. Have a great day.